Hello, I am Juliette Bezold, designer of Fable Cowl from the Winter 2018 issue of Interweave Crochet, as you see pictured here on the cover. And I'm here today to do a brief tutorial of some of the specialty stitches and techniques used in this cowl. Now, Fable Cowl uses the Tunisian two-color in the round spiral technique, and I'm going to assume in this video that you understand the basic mechanics of the two-color Tunisian spiral technique. If you do not, I recommend this video produced by Interweave by Lily Chin, which is a wonderful tutorial for two-color Tunisian in the round, and in fact is how I learned. So here is a sample of Fable Cowl that I made recently. Now you'll notice that the pattern here appears upside down to what you'll see on the cover. This is, I believe, the way I would wear it, with the pattern branching up. However, when you work it, the pattern is going to be appearing to point down as you work the stitches. And the Tunisian simple stitches combined with the twisted stitches form these little V's, which form columns as you work. So let's begin. I have a sample which I have already begun. I have worked, here's my beginning, and I'm using a different stitch marker to mark my beginning row. I've already worked a foundation setup row, and I've placed my stitch markers every 8 stitches, or one with 7 in between, and those mark the repeats, which are 8 stitches each. I have 3 repeats here for this sample. And I have begun row 1, where we are working Tunisian simple stitches in combination with twisted simple stitches. So first I will demonstrate the twisted simple stitch. And again, this is the two-color in the round spiral technique. I use interchangeable hooks connected by a cable, but a straight hook works equally well if all you have is a straight double-ended hook. And this is a size M with super bulky yarn. So first, to work the pairs of stitches which form the ribs, each pair is a Tunisian simple stitch followed by a twisted simple stitch. For a twisted simple stitch, you need to enter the stitch, if you are right-handed, from the left to the right. And you may be thinking, if you've never done this before, well, how does that work? My hook is pointed in the opposite direction. The trick is you need to use your fingernail. Put the hook to the left of your stitch, and using your finger, pop it over the hook. Then yarn over and drop a loop as you would in a standard simple stitch. And again, if you were left-handed, you would be working the same way. Your hook would be coming from the left, so you would place it to the right of the stitch and use your fingernail to pop that loop over the hook. So let's work another pair. First, a standard simple stitch, then a twisted stitch. I place my hook beside the loop to the left and use my fingernail to pop it over, yarn over, and drop a loop. And you see how that mirrors that loop, so they are pointing towards each other like a little V. Work another pair. Simple stitch, twisted simple stitch, simple stitch, twisted simple stitch. And this completes my round. Here I am at my stitch marker. So we will be working now row 2 of the pattern, which is the first row in the 7-row stitch repeat. So first, you are going to work an increase in this stitch. Now the back bump increase utilizes the back bump of the return pass chain. So here, as you see, as you return pass chain, here's the normal V that you would see at the top of any crochet stitch. The back bump is right here. If you roll your stitch, it appears to right on the top. The back bump is the loop that goes over your vertical bar of your Tunisian stitch. So that is the loop. I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over, and drop a loop. That is the back bump increase, and it is the only increase used in this pattern. What alternates is whether you are doing this back bump increase before or after you've worked that loop. So in row 2, you work the back bump increase first. Then you work your simple stitch in that loop. You work your twisted simple stitch to make that pair. And you move your stitch marker to the increased stitch. Now I'm going to work, and now I need to actually switch around and do a return pass here quickly. And this you do need to do periodically as you work in the round. Whenever your hook becomes full, you just flip it around and work off some stitches with a standard return pass. When I work a Tunisian pattern, when I design a Tunisian pattern, I prefer those that use a standard return pass. Keep all the hard part on the forward pass, and the return pass is so lovely and relaxing. All right, so I'm going to stop when I have a few loops, flip back around to keep working forward. So I'm going to work another pair of stitches, simple stitch, twisted simple stitch. Now I'm going to work the next pair together. So simple stitch, 2 together. I insert my hook under 1, 2 loops, yarn over and drop a loop, just as if to simple stitch, work the last pair. And that is the repeat of row 2. I'm at my next stitch marker. So again, at the stitch marker, we work a back bump increase, and that back bump, which is the loop that's over top of your vertical bar, you want to move your stitch marker to that stitch. Then you work the pair. You work that stitch as a simple stitch, and then you work its pair as a twisted simple stitch. You work the next stitch, pair, first a simple stitch, then a twisted simple stitch, and then you work the next pair together, simple stitch 2 together, and then to finish the repeat, a simple stitch and a twisted simple stitch. And once again, I need to turn around and work off my loops. Return pass chain. I think the return pass is my favorite part of Tunisian. I love the rhythm of it. I think that's why I prefer Tunisian crochet even to standard crochet. The return pass to me, especially on a large project, has this lovely relaxing rhythm. And so now I have one more repeat on my 3 repeat cowl. So again, I'll do a back bump increase. Here's my back bump on top of the vertical bar. And I will move my stitch marker to that. And once you've become comfortable with this stitch pattern, you don't need to use these markers. Once you get a feeling for the way the spines bend and flow, you can drop those, but you always need to maintain your end repeat marker or beginning repeat marker. It depends on how you view it. So now I'll work a pair. First I work a simple stitch in my increased stitch. Then I work the twisted simple stitch. I work another pair, simple stitch, twisted simple stitch. Now I'm to my decrease. I work these 2 together as one, and then I work a pair. Now I am at row 3. Now for row 3, here we're going to work this stitch first before we work our back bump increase. So I'll work it as a simple stitch. Now I'll work my back bump increase. And again, there's that back bump. You can tell it's the back bump because it has my vertical bar running under it. I'll work that back bump increase. And this creates a pair. In the next round, this one will be the simple stitch. That will be the twisted stitch. Then I will work this pair together. Oh, I need to remember to move my marker up. And again, I'm moving my marker to that increased stitch I made. Now, time to flip and work off my loops again. Another return pass. And here I'm using my dark color as my background and my light color as my foreground, as in the sample in the magazine. I think it would be equally successful with that reversed and the dark color as the foreground, making the wavy leaf skeleton pattern. And as you saw with the sample I made, I used a variegated Noro yarn for the return pass color, which is also quite striking. All right, so now I worked my increase here. I worked a pair. I'm going to work another pair. And now I'm going to work a decrease. So this decrease is going to be over the decrease from the row below plus the simple stitch of the next row. So I'm working the next 2 loops together, simple stitch 2 together, and then this is a twisted stitch, which brings those 2 together as a pair. So you can see now the combination of 2 rows, it takes 2 rows, 2 increases to make a new pair for an increase. It takes 2 rows, 2 decreases to decrease 1 pair for a decrease. So this is the row 2 pattern. Again, first I work the marked stitch, then I work my back bump increase in the bump behind it, move my stitch marker to the newly increased stitch. I'm careful to catch just that loop and not any other parts. It's a little challenging to get these stitch markers around this bulky yarn. I do like working with bulky yarn though. You can whip up a cowl in 2 or 3 days. Work 2 pairs of stitches, simple stitch, followed by a twisted simple stitch. And then there's that decrease. Pick up the next 2 loops, which happens to be the decrease of the row below and the next simple stitch. Work those 2 together, followed by the twisted stitch to complete that second repeat. So that was rows 2 and 3. Rows 3, 4, 5, and 6 accomplish the same thing. So here in this sample, you can see this was my setup row down here. Here was row 1 where we're just working those 2 pairs, simple stitch and twisted simple stitch. Here was row 2 with the first increase and the first decrease. And then here was row 3, which we were just working on with the second increase, which was this stitch right here, and the second decrease, which brought those 2 into a pair. So as you work rows 4, 5, 6, and 7, you'll be increasing, adding this pair, decreasing again, adding this pair, decreasing again, and then row 8 is just worked plain as row 1 was with the pairs, simple stitch, twisted stitch, simple stitch, twisted stitch. And that is the repeat. And then as they stack up, the pattern grows into this beautiful traveling leafy vine pattern. Now you will notice that in the instructions, it does tell you to switch the last marker and the row beginning marker at the end of every row 8. And that's because as you're increasing and decreasing, you're actually working these stitches twice as you work through the whole pattern. So if you didn't switch those markers, it would be fine. The pattern would still work out. You would just have worked another half of a round by the time you got to the end. You wouldn't have the same number of rows. You would have actually like 1 more row on half of your cowl, which isn't a big deal. Most people probably wouldn't even notice. But if you do switch that, then you actually wind up with an even number of rows all the way around. But if you forget to switch it, it's really not that big a deal. It just stops you from having repeated 1 repeat's worth of stitches for an extra row. So there you have it. That is Fable Cowl. I hope this helps anyone who has been struggling with these challenging but beautiful stitches, and I can't wait to see your finished projects. Enjoy and happy crocheting. Thanks.